Welcome to Shift. So what are we going to be doing today? Shift is basically a series of conversations about digital media in San Francisco. And I feel like it's very important we're having this conversation in San Francisco right now because people think of New York basically as the center of the media universe. But what you think about with digital media these days is different than a simple publication. There's so many different components that go into creating something between the time that an editor comes up with a story and the time somebody's sharing it through social media. To think about things like user interface, about how people are moving through your site, about how much time people are spending on a page, about how to read the numbers and the data behind your site, about how people are going to be sharing the information that you're giving them. Are they going to put it on Pinterest? Are they going to put it on Tumblr? Are they going to be sharing it through Facebook and Twitter? And so when you think about digital media, you don't just think about a publication. You think about all the different places and people and ideas that go into making that publication, bringing it to life, and then the people, how they are reacting and using that information on the other end. And so I feel like San Francisco is rapidly becoming the center of new media. There's so many different tech companies and so many different news agencies and then urban storytelling sources that are here that are helping really push things forward. The other big reason we're doing this in San Francisco is because the Bold Italic is in San Francisco. We were started in 2009 as an experiment by Gannett, which is a bigger media company that owns USA Today and a number of other media companies. And we are this random experiment that comes out of their innovation division. And the idea behind the Bold Italic was to wipe the slate clean and try something completely different with local media. And so our boss partnered with IDEO, the human-centered design firm, and decided to do a new publication that was really focused on personalized storytelling and strong design. And so over the years, we've created content that has to do with personal essays about what it means to live in the Bay Area, humor pieces because San Francisco has a very silly and whimsical side, opinion pieces, newsy opinion pieces, and visual stories, with Jessica, our visual producer, we'll talk about later. And so this is our form of urban storytelling, but we also think of ourselves as a brand. And that's another issue that if you are a new media entity, you have to think about too. So we have a shop where we think about, okay, these digital components on our site, how can people take these artifacts home, put them on their wall, make postcards out of them? And then the other side of this is events. We think about the revenue model, and we think about how can we take this chorus of voices that we have on the site and bring it to life and really have conversations with people in the city about the issues and the industries that really matter the most to them. And so today we're taking this chorus of voices idea from the site and bringing it into the room. And so we're going to have these discussions about things that we're banging our head against the wall, things that are inspiring us, kind of the nuances of how we do things, how we read information. And not just from us on the stage talking to you guys, but also we hope people interact and bring up, share your ideas and your frustrations and ask us questions, and we can ask you questions too. We have a happy hour at the end of the day, we have a coffee break in the middle of the day. And so this is an idea of like, let's talk, share what we're going through and what it means to be making digital media in San Francisco right now. And how can we go boldly into the future of this industry and really make San Francisco even more of a media town than it already is. So with that, welcome to Shift.
Maybe you can start by telling us, you just got a little taste of what Circa is. How many people in the room know Circa, have used it, have read? Okay, pretty good, pretty good.
Getting it out.
So tell me what when you founded Circa, what was your thesis about the news business and how it's changing that you were operating on?
There was a couple of things. So this was almost exactly 3 years ago, so prior to news becoming sexy again, when I was brainstorming with somebody about some problems that we identified in news, there was one that was paramount to everything, which is that the news simply forgot what we read yesterday, every day, forever. Which meant that whenever I wanted to stay on top of something, I would come back to an article, and it somehow had to catch me up on whatever happened in perpetuity for everywhere before that. So if I'm reading about Ebola, and I read an article today, tomorrow when I read another article, 50% of what I read today is what I read yesterday. So we wanted to find this way to evolve stories and allow readers to subscribe to specific stories and continually get those updates. So that was kind of big piece number one. And the second was, I was standing in line waiting for coffee, and I was making my way through a 1,000-word article just about some random news event. It wasn't anything in particular that needed to be that long, and I realized I'm standing in line for coffee now, which is different than somebody sitting down with a cup of coffee for 40 minutes and digesting all the news. And if all I can is stand in line and I want to make it through a bunch of stuff, then I didn't have that opportunity because it was just so long and so dense, and it really didn't need to be. So we wanted to find a way to succinctly tell stories in a mobile environment, and it didn't necessarily mean short, but some way to communicate in a more effective way around the kind of news happenings.
Now, on behalf of journalists who get paid by the word, I want to say it's a terrible idea. You alluded to, you said before news got sexy. I assume that you're referring to things like this week's news that Vox Media has raised money at like $400 million valuation. BuzzFeed raised a huge amount of money recently at an even higher valuation, and Vice even bigger than that. So what is the message? What's going on here? Why is the news business, which traditionally has been regarded as maybe kind of a crappy business, suddenly so sexy to VCs?
Well, in some cases, it still can be a crappy business, and frankly, when we got started, when I went out to go raise some money initially, I mean, I've never been in news before, this is my first game, and the initial reaction to pretty much everybody that I went to was, why the fuck are you getting into news? Because they were flabbergasted, and my premise was that I just felt like news has not been disrupted until literally probably about 3 or 4 years ago. That all we ever did was just move from one medium to the next, and it was not much different, right? Moving from print to the web really wasn't fundamentally that much different. Same amount of space to put stuff, you put the words on the page and you're done. But now we're getting to a place where the distribution channels are changing, how you actually come to news has completely changed, as well as just the ways that you can present news and the BuzzFeed listicles and the quizzes and all these things. So you have a time when those that were sophisticated around those systems, those changes in distribution, could leverage that. And that's why you see BuzzFeed just take off, and that's why you see properties like Vox and really unique new kinds of properties take off where others have kind of fallen off. I mean, the most viewed stuff tends to be those hot new properties these days, and that all kind of picked up maybe about 1.5 years ago.
So, in this environment where you have a lot of people who are getting their news primarily through social, these Facebook and Twitter present sort of a facsimile of a comprehensive news experience, but maybe not a truly comprehensive news experience. Twitter, for instance, is now developing a new version of their timeline that doesn't require any input from the user to decide what they want to see. It's going to be an algorithmic timeline like Facebook's. What are the problems with that?
Well, from a business standpoint, from an industry standpoint, I'll ask a very fundamental question. How many people in this room this morning have read something online? Great. Okay, we're off to a good start.
Anybody? Okay.
You're breaking my flow here. Yeah. All right. So you've all read something this morning. How many could specifically tell me all the places in which you got that news? And I'm not talking about where you clicked on the link from, but can you tell me the specific name of the place where the actual article came from? Hands? Exactly my point. So the point that I'm making is simply that because we're now in a place where your loyalty is no longer to those individual brands, maybe saved for some place that has truly unique content, such as Italic. But the fact is that all of these guys have built their businesses on loyalty in the past. You had subscriptions, and that was what loyalty was. And now you've moved to a time when the channels by which you actually get news have nothing to do with those guys. The dangers, the problems that exist is the fact that none of you in this room knew where the heck you got that news today. You didn't know who actually wrote it. And that's the challenge. You don't know why you're ever going to go back to that place. You don't know why you might trust one place versus the next. And I think over the next few years, that's where the biggest problems lie. It's not in getting page views. It's not in getting all this stuff, because the worst part about this is if, let's just say, one company is doing really well on Facebook and they're just constantly in front of people's faces, hit all the right notes for the algorithm to do well. They make one tweak and all of a sudden it's off the map. I mean, how many Upworthy videos have you watched in the last month versus maybe this exact same time last year? And it may have affected those places and those kind of viral video stuff, but now moving forward, I think it's going to have a much bigger impact on publishers and places like that. That's a big problem, I think, loyalty.
You're saying problem from the point of view of publishers?
Of the publishers, but also I think from the standpoint of the consumer as well, which is the next bit of this, which is there's this book Eli Persier wrote, The Filter Bubble, and the insinuation is that that because we find our news through those sources, Facebook, Twitter, things like that, we tend to pigeonhole into a very specific worldview, and it's the worldview of the people that we decide to connect with. And you're going to naturally want to connect with people that have a like mind. And so you kind of get just fed candy all day long, and you never really expand, because there's nothing worse than walking into a room where everybody just nods their head and says, yes, like, yes, your opinion is right and all this is great, and no one ever challenges, which is why I think you have more extreme political views these days, because they just get pandered to. And so I think that some of where we have to head next is a way to fill in the blank, which is kind of where Circa comes in, which is we don't have like some algorithm that personalizes for you. We don't have like you walk in and you pick all the channels you want and things like that. You know, it's sort of our belief that there is still an importance in editorial control of kind of just telling people, hey, this is what's actually important in the world right now, and finding a clever way to do that. But somewhere along the way, somebody's going to have to fill in these blanks.
So that's what I'm wondering. When you have Facebook, companies like Facebook, getting more and more sophisticated about delivering news to you in a way that feels comprehensive, but really is just basically kind of flattering your impulses, how do you convince those users that they need to get outside of that and get their news from a product that actually does fill in those blanks?
I think that we've had this challenge. I mean, this is not a new thing. I think that as soon as there was the advent of sort of the leaning television channels, and you have, you know, Fox News on one end of the spectrum and NBC on the one end of the spectrum, you know, the people that are consuming those channels, they don't think that they're missing anything. It's the same problem that you described today. I think that the way that we can get around this is sort of the thesis by which Circa was built, which is that content and product need to come together in some fashion. That it can't just be a writer writing some words on some page and then putting it inside of an app, and somehow that is a good experience. In the case of Circa, for instance, we have this little feature where you can hit follow, and then everything that happens inside of that story from then on, you're going to get an update about. And that is an example of something that doesn't exist anywhere else in news. And as far as a complete product is concerned, it fulfills a need that they can't get anywhere else, which means that now we can continue to bring other interesting stuff to them because they have that hook. And so I think that for anybody else to be able to come into this space and start finding ways to be more comprehensive and fill in those blanks, they're going to have to find those hooks. And those hooks are going to have to be natural, and they're going to have to make the user or the reader feel as though they need that thing. So it's, okay, yes, maybe our distribution channel still is Facebook, and people discover what we are or one of our stories via Facebook, but then we can kind of pull them in through something that is more akin to a product feature as opposed to just better content.
Do you think it's possible to, I mean, when you look at something like BuzzFeed that was basically created to be the Facebook, well, maybe not Facebook, but the social news service, do you need to start with an editorial identity, or can you start with distribution as your starting point for a news company?
I think you could probably do both, but I think that those that don't come into it with a true north, a mission, I think they're going to really not find their way. I think the best possible example I can come up with right now is Vice, where they really do have what feels like cohesive approach to how they're thinking about news. And they're successful in social right now, extremely successful. I mean, they're just skyrocketing at this moment. And it's because I think you couple that, frankly, well, in their case, a very cynical worldview, which kind of then, like, is how everything else gets written around it and how they decide what to cover and things like that. But if you just establish that foothold and go into social, then I think you have a real opportunity. I think the challenge with something like BuzzFeed is it doesn't really feel like it has an identity. It feels like it is this like schizophrenic child that doesn't know how to like deal with what the input is versus what they're talking about and things like that. I think there is opportunity there, and they're going to have to really coalesce around, personally, I think this news division that they're working on. But I really do think that you have to have some vision for it to work.
And how about the what you might call the more artisanal end of the news business? Everything from something like the All to even Serial. Maybe you lump in with that. Are there big market opportunities for that sort of thing, or is that basically always going to be just sort of a marginal? You always have a skinny tail of the curve that's interested in that kind of thing.
I like analogies. I'm a beer guy. I love craft beer, and you have the behemoths that are sort of the big beer companies, and then you have some middle tier big beer companies, and you have this like spattering of amazing stuff being produced by hundreds, if not thousands, of breweries around the world. And I think that moving into a place where we have more of that is great. Now, I had a conversation one time with the owner of Boulder Beer when I lived in Boulder, and I said, why Boulder? Why did you choose here to make your brewery versus anywhere else? He's like, well, I'm not really going to make any money in beer, and so I'd really like to be in a place where I'd like to live. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty good way of thinking about it. And whereas I'm not going to necessarily say that about all of media, but I do think there are going to be brands that come up where they're not going to make gobs amounts of money. They're not going to be some billion-dollar company. They may not even be $100 million or a $10 million company, but they're going to be a good thing for the consumers of that media as well as hopefully for that business. And Serial, if you're not listening to it, then something is really wrong and you have to fix that now. But that is a perfect example of just absolutely incredible content that's taken the entire internet by storm, and is just a couple of people telling good stories. I think that's going to just continue to succeed, that model.
I just have a hunch here. How many people in this room, show of hands, are listening to Serial?
Who thinks Adnan did it?
Oh. I thought there'd be more people. When you look around the landscape, is there anything that all the companies, all the news companies that are thriving in this new environment that ties them all together, that they're all doing in common?
Everybody's doing different things, and I think that's what's really beautiful about this sort of new landscape, because for the last 100 years, the news business was, we're going to have our view, we're going to put out our news, have our journalists, have our paper, but for the most part, the model was mostly the same across every single source. And I think what's interesting about all of these new news companies, ourselves included, and you have Vox and Gawker and Business Insider and any one of these things, we're all doing something different. The Bold Italic is putting out phenomenal journalism on poop in San Francisco, and that is not, by the way, an exaggeration. There's been, I think, 2 or 3 articles now that have captivated me every time. But it's sort of my belief that that is what is necessary. For us to move the news industry forward, there has to be fresh thinking every time. It can't just be some formula anymore.
Do we have any questions here, by the way?
I see a shaking head. Do we have anybody that wants to shout out a question? Nope. All right, we gotta keep talking, Jim.
We gotta keep talking. So if I put you in charge of the New York Times right now, what would you do?
Shut it down. No, I don't. I'm sorry, that was a joke. Please do not quote me on that. No, I think that, I actually think they're making some pretty right moves. I've had a lot of conversations with them in different capacities, and I think that some of the things that they're doing, they're very clearly understanding that, the future is not in paper anymore. Dead trees are going to go away at some point. But the way that they look at it is still kind of on that side. They still, when they hire for somebody, they're still kind of hiring somebody to write for that print, and then it somehow trickles its way into the web, and even shuttering some of their blogs and stuff like that kind of almost illustrated that a little bit more. But oddly enough, there was a job posting recently, about a month ago, and the job posting literally said print editor. And it was the first time that's ever happened, because they would have normally just said editor. And the fact that they said that way sort of insinuates they might be thinking about these businesses as a little bit different. And so, if I were them, I think that I would just right now make the cut and say, web comes first, web and mobile mobile comes first, web comes second, print comes third.
Do you think is this a better time to be a news consumer or a worse time than 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
I think it's a great time. I think that you're finally in a place where you're able to get a wide spattering of opinions, but I think that the danger that we're coming into is that if you really want to read about an interesting phenomenon in news, I would look up yellow journalism in Wikipedia. And it was a time when there was sort of unchecked production of news, where somebody could just come up with some sort of headline that they thought was going to sell papers and run out into the street and make this bold claim, and people would buy their papers. And it really took a while for that whole phenomenon to go away, and I actually think we're in a danger of coming back to that. And it's not because necessarily of the publications, although they can be guilty of this a little bit in just sensationalistic headlines that have no connection whatsoever to the content. And you know, it reminds me a lot of those 5 o'clock news programs that'd be like, what you don't know about your toothbrush might be killing you. You know, it's like, you can't, there is no sort of oversight in that way. But the challenge is actually in consumers writing this stuff. And our platforms are getting better. Medium, I freaking love Medium, and I write on Medium a decent amount. And I can say whatever I want, it looks legitimate. There's a Medium stamp there, and I can send it out, and I could just like make some crazy bold-faced claim that whatever, and the speed and the pace at which things get distributed now, it can flurry up, and then whatever actually comes later and sort of pulls that back may be just a quiet whisper compared to the loud roar that was whatever claim is made. So I think we have to be, as news consumers, more skeptical than ever before that what we're reading may or may not be true.
Medium's such an interesting one because I have trouble explaining to people what's new about it. It's kind of just Blogger, but better. So can you explain why you think it's so exciting?
I think it's exciting because it is a egoless platform. So I wrote a post on Medium that ironically got no views and made me sad, but the post was called On Medium and Ego, and the premise was that for this time now, we are removing ourselves and our ego from the equation, meaning like previously a bold was the epitome of our ego. It was our name and our words, and that was what it was. We wanted that blog to perform well as opposed to maybe an individual piece. When you put it on Medium, all of a sudden, you kind of strip away that ego a little bit, and you now become part of sort of this greater thing. You know, write for magazines, and so your experience in that world has been, you know, you are not only yourself, but you are part of a greater piece, right? So as someone reads it, they may stumble upon your thing, they may really enjoy your particular pieces and seek you out, but for the most part, you're still this part of this greater word and this greater mission. I think that when someone contributes to Medium by taking away the ego itself, there's something that comes out in the content differently. I don't know, that was my crazy brain thinking about it.
I have trouble thinking about egoless and journalism in the same sentence, but we have time for one more quick one. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to see your views on user-generated content, which seems to be a feature that everybody's trying to incorporate. So I'd like to see what are the advantages and disadvantages that you're seeing out of all the tools in the industry.
UGC is amazing. I think the idea that something can happen and within seconds someone was on the ground somewhere. We're in a world now, we don't necessarily have to have 2,000, 4,000 journalists employed around the world to know what's going on. But I think that it's amazing and scary at the same time, because verification becomes the #1 biggest issue there. Because this guy that was on a plane, or claimed to be on a plane, and claimed that there was something crazy happening with the person next to them, and they were writing these notes, and they were taking pictures, and it went super viral, and it turns out it was just this comedy dude or this comedian that just made it all up. And yet, it was on the nightly news, it was on all of these places. So I think it's a really interesting time for that, and I think UGC has a lot of opportunity, but we have to be even more skeptical about what goes on there, and the people that are responsible for actually putting words out there need to be responsible for debunking just as much as they are for wanting to get page views. I'm also not convinced that's going to happen, because they just want those page views.
I think that's going to blow up if we keep talking. So thanks everybody, thanks for the question. And,
if you have any other questions, I'm just MG on Twitter, and I'm happy to answer them later. Thanks, guys.